turn to those Republicans. This week we saw a rift forming between two pillars of the Republican Party, Governor Chris Christie and Senator Rand Paul.
If he cared about protecting this country, maybe he wouldn't be in this gimme, 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 gimme all the money you have in Washington.
Maybe he should start looking at cutting the pork barrel spending that he brings home to Kentucky, but I doubt he would. Because most Washington politicians only care about bringing home the bacon.
This is the king of bacon talking about bacon. If we can sit down, I'm inviting him for a beer.
I don't really have time for that at the moment.
Good for the Republican Party?
Well, actually, there is a rising libertarian stream that Chris Christie has said is a very dangerous thought. So let's be clear about what libertarianism is and what it isn't. It is not anarchism. It has a role for government. But what libertarianism says, it comes in many flavors and many degrees of severity. It basically says before the government bridges the freedom of an individual or the freedom of several individuals contracting together, that government ought to have A, a compelling reason, and B, a constitutional warrant for doing so. Now, if Mr. Christie thinks that's a dangerous thought, a number of people are going to say Mr. Christie himself may be dangerous.
Jeff Zeleny.
I think that Governor Christie actually emerges at least a short-term winner from this fight. He's one of the few Republicans who's willing to take on Rand Paul. Around Capitol Hill, there are so many Republicans who are afraid to say anything against Senator Paul or his father, Ron Paul, because they're sort of worried about all these followers they have, and they have a lot of supporters. But Governor Christie, first and foremost, is running for re-election of the governor of New Jersey. He's likely to win in November, so this is good for him now. Long term, it gives him somewhat of a brand that he's not afraid of Rand Paul. But George is right. There is this growing libertarian strain that is going to absolutely be front and center in the 2016 primary, and it is going to define who Republicans put forward.
Okay, fight over who wants to talk.
Republicans and Republican leadership and the establishment has to be very careful about attacking libertarians, I think, in this country generally and in Republicans specifically. This is not just a libertarian movement in a country that started in the last 10 years. I was out at Walden, and I was this past week had reread Thoreau, who's basically the father of libertarianism in this country at a time of great change. Libertarian has existed in this country. Ronald Reagan described libertarianism as at the heart of the conservative movement of this country. I think you have to be careful, you have to be compassionate, you have to have some sense of living in government. But I think in the end who benefits the most from this is Rand Paul, because he represents a very strong rising movement in the country and in Republicans. I think he benefits from
the Democrats.
See, I think that libertarianism this week has demonstrated a lot of problems. When you've seen the strain in Congress, what's really happening is it's nihilism. I mean, it's the libertarian wing of the Republican Party is what's driving these debates, which are ensuring that the Congress can't act. Boehner is being defeated again and again within his party. The unique moment we're in is that there are so many ruptures, national security issues, what the role of government is, food stamps, a whole slew of issues over the last several weeks where we've seen Republicans actually unable to govern because the basis of their party, the Tea Party, is really driving them to be able to say no to anything.
So in the end, did the Democrats win out of this?
No, they both win, right? This is basically, hey, everybody, I'm running in 2016, and this is the kind of Republican I will be. And they're laying out the difference. And I think what you're going to see is this range, right? With Chris Christie on one side, Rand Paul on the other, and whatever candidates are in between who are all sort of taking their sides. And the challenge, I think, is going to be, when you look back at the GOP autopsy, right, is which Republican Party are we going to be? Can you get through a primary and get through a general election?
Do we know, George?
If the indictment of libertarianism is that it prevented the passage of an execrable farm bill, the libertarians can live with that.
Okay, you're right. It also said that the position of the Republican Party now is that we're going to double cuts to people who are hungry. We're going to say we're going to double cuts on food stamps because we want to give more money to ag subsidies. That, I think, is the real challenge that the libertarians are
I talked to Senator McCain this week, and he said all this is a moot point. If Republicans do not sort of go forward on immigration reform, it will not matter who they put forward because the party will collapse. And that autopsy you're talking about, that's exactly
the huge benefit to this right now among Republicans, in my view, is social issues aren't part of the conversation right now. And I think in the end, if Republicans can keep social issues off the debate going into 2016, and it's about finances, it's about the role of government, Republicans will benefit from that. If social issues come back,
That's
no, it's not front and center between Rand Paul and Chris Christie.
That's true.
It will be